Hey, good morning, y'all. We're at Hickory Air Museum in Hickory, North Carolina. We just got in last night, top of the morning. We're here to meet with Bill. Bill's gonna introduce us to 3 other pilots, 4 including himself. He's gonna give us a tour and show us these cool planes. We're gonna meet a guy named Scar. That's his call sign. You know, anybody named Scar must be a pretty interesting dude, so you guys stay tuned. Like and subscribe. Hey, welcome back, guys. We're with Mike Vizcarra. I saw your name is Scar.
That's right, nickname or call sign Scar. Yeah,
that's pretty cool. I said anybody named Scar is somebody I want to meet. That was so cool. So maybe if you'll tell us about that, your career and a bit about the plane, please.
The call sign in the Navy, you typically get it for doing something either really stupid, okay, and that's the one you don't want, or it's a variation or a play on your name. Mm-hmm. So this, luckily in my case, this Scar is my last name, and Scar became my call sign. So that was rather simple. Because again, I could go over some really funny call signs, and I wouldn't want to be called that for. I was fortunate enough to serve in the Navy for 30 years. Yes. So I joined in '84, and I retired just 10 years ago in '14, and I had the pleasure of flying the Tomcat for the vast majority of that time. I became a squadron commander. As a commanding officer, we had to transition from the Tomcat to the Super Hornet, which is the replacement. Unfortunately, my career outlasted the Tomcat, but I thoroughly enjoyed flying it, and I can show you around a little bit here.
Oh, sure.
We could start. It's a huge airplane.
Yes.
It when fully loaded with weapons and fuel, it could be upwards of 70,000 pounds. And you know, taking a catapult shot off the aircraft carrier in a 70,000-pound airplane is something. So it's the fastest plane that we had in the fleet. It's built to go 2 times the speed of sound, and I had done that one time because we don't typically do it that often. You use a lot of extra fuel when you're going super fast. But on this particular case, we got the opportunity to see how fast it could go. It was in one of these models. So the F-14 had the F-14A, the B, and the D. This is the later model. The D had the larger engines, the GE F-110, which unfortunately are no longer in this airplane. You can see right through it. But it has the larger engines that had a lot more thrust. So the difference it made for flying the airplane on the aircraft carrier is on the previous versions, we'd have to go full afterburner to take off. Because once you get, now you're gonna go flying because the catapult will throw you off the end. But once you get off the end, you need a full afterburner to maintain flight at that slow speed. In the newer airplane, we only had to go full military power, and it was enough to fly away. So there was a lot of extra power, which made this plane more agile and faster. So again, I gone 2.2 Mach, 2.5. This is a little bit different. This is how one of the ways you can tell the difference between an F-14D and an F-14A and a B. The A's and the B's had a single chin pod. This is a television camera. What this allowed us to do is identify the threat at range because it has a pretty decent resolution. You know, nothing by today's standards, but this is all 60s and 70s technology. So we could identify an airliner out at 20, 25 miles easily, and that way we would know not to obviously shoot the wrong airplane. Right. This is what was added for the F-14D, and this is the IRST. IRST stands for Infrared Search and Track, and it would look for IR heat signatures, and it allow us to passively track and target without having to use our radar. Because sometimes when you have your radar going, this thing's pretty big, it would alert the enemy. This is sort of a passive way to attack, and very expensive piece of gear. So not every plane had them. A lot of times it would have this fake cover. This is actually the real cover of the IRST. Inside here is as you can see, large nose, large radar. The early version is the AUG-9. This is the APG-71, which is the follow-on version for the F-14D. Allowed us to track multiple targets at one time. So that was nice, but it also allowed us to target multiple. We could actually launch multiple missiles simultaneously, which is like having, you know, an armed kamikaze coming off the wings and taking out your enemy. And we didn't even have to stick around. If we decided that we'd done our business, we could leave. And the missiles were smart enough. They had a radar in the missile itself that could go active and find the target and kill it. So, and this again was designed primarily for the Soviet Union threat back in the 70s and the 80s. So the plane was designed to go really fast and launch multiple missiles at multiple targets at the same time, and it did the job perfectly. So it adapted well after the Soviet Union imploded in '89. It adapted really well, as you might have heard from the A6 was a primary bomb dropper.
Yep.
Once they retired, they put on a lot of precision guidance capability for the F-14, and it became a fantastic bomber. We don't have one on here, but I'll show you that part where that's where we'd have normally the FLIR pod.
Yes.
Was not designed specifically for the Tomcat, but actually adapted from the Air Force. It's like off the market. You could buy it, and then we put it on this plane, and it worked really good.
Wow.
So we'll walk around this side here. This, as you can imagine, is the gun. So it did have a gun. It's a 20mm cannon that goes all the way back here, these gun gas purge door. And it has barrels, so it's a Gatling gun. And we only carried like 680 rounds, which is not that much, especially when you consider that it could fire them at 2,000 rounds per minute. So when you go, you're pretty much out of bullets.
Wow.
So it was not our go-to weapon. We carried 3 different types of missiles. And there's one of them right over here. We might as well walk that way.
Yeah.
This is called the AIM-54 Phoenix missile, and it was designed with the AUG-9 radar, because again, I said that radar could track multiple targets simultaneously, and it's got a radar in here. So initially it would get the information from the host, or the aircraft radar. Once it sees the target with its own radar, we could have it go active. And that's when we didn't have to worry about it. It's gonna go off. So this thing could take out targets almost approaching 100 miles away, which is, it's crazy. We used to carry 6 of these. They're heavy. 1,000 pounds, and but we can carry 6 of them, and again, they were pretty expensive missiles at the same time. So we would typically carry these. This fairing right here, you can see the shape aerodynamically. So the tip would fit right here with the bomb. Now this is normally not here. This is here to make it carry bombs. Okay. So you can't carry bombs and the missile, but this has the bomb rack that you can see. This is how the bombs would come off. So this is what we call the belly of the aircraft, and this is where we carry the majority of the weapons. However, we did have a couple wing stations on the outside here. So we'd carry typically a Sparrow missile here, which is a smaller radar guided, didn't have the active capability that the larger missile did, but it was still a good missile. Carry that here, or you can carry the Phoenix here, one of the two. And then this smaller station where we'd have our IR missile, or a Sidewinder missile, which is a heat seeker. It looks for heat, basically, and once you launch it, you don't have to support it. It's going to look for that heat and hopefully take out the target. You can see you've got the massive intakes.
Oh yeah.
And this is a pretty interesting system. These would operate via the computer, but it basically would adjust the airflow that comes into the engine that allowed it to go so fast. Because obviously, if you're going 2 times the speed of sound, there's a lot of air coming in. So it'd be able to disrupt the airflow and allow the engine not to choke on the fast air. So this, as we walk around the back here, you can see the massive wheels, allowed the airplane to take traps on the aircraft carrier, which the plane was probably one of the, not the most difficult, but the engines, especially in the older version, the F-14A, were a little bit slower to respond than, say, the modern engines. So it was not as easy an aircraft to land on the carrier than, say, the Hornet, the Super Hornet. So this is an external gas tank right here. Obviously, they have the engine bay doors. We pre-flight them. The wings make this a really interesting plane because not that many have the wing sweep. So right now it's back all the way, and actually this isn't a flying, this is the full aft, this is flyable. Okay. Now you're usually going to be pretty fast when they're this far back. Normally they're going to be out 20 degrees, allows the most maneuverability. And obviously you can't have your flaps down when they have an airbag here that inflates. You can feel it's like vinyl, it's not metal, but it's a pliable material. Basically, it allows it to get snug when the wings get back. Most of that is handled by the air data computer, kind of automatically based on speed and angle of attack. But we would normally, when we come into the overhead to land, would manually sweep the wings back because when it looks cool. And then when you brake, it bleeds a lot faster. So the idea is to get as many aircraft to land as fast as you can. So you come in at 500 miles an hour, brake, and leave the wings back, and you bleed a lot of energy. And then once you get to 250 knots or so, you put the wings in auto, which means they'd come forward, land, put the landing gear down, put the hook down, and you're pretty much ready to land. Wow. This is the horizontal stabilizer, and you can see it's differential, meaning they work independently. So this is what gave some agility to the Tomcat, and you can see it is absolutely huge. It's like the size of a a smaller airplane wing. In fact, this is larger than the A4. I don't know if you're familiar with the Skyhawk, but it's a smaller aircraft that we used to use in the Navy for training and eventually for adversary to simulate the bad guys. This is actually bigger than the wing of the airplane. So differential stabilizer gave it some agility. These are the exhaust nozzles on the larger engine. They look completely different from the older version, which are the TF30 engines, Pratt & Whitney, on the F-14A. These were on the F-14B and the F-14D, and again, add a lot of very, very reliable and very responsive and a lot of great power. This here is what we call the boat tail. This is where the fuel comes out when we dump fuel if we need to lighten our load to land. Obviously, this is the hook. This is the hook point. This is what catches your wire when you land on the aircraft. The whole hook, of course, will rotate based on this point here and come down. But this little piece here, this is it. And it's got this humongous bolt, as you can see. This would take some abuse because you land on the aircraft carrier, it's always going to be touching the ground. So it would get swapped out every 10 flights. Wow. Okay, so they make good bookends. Most aviators will have one that they were able to keep. I got two, I chromed them, and they look really cool. So back here is the chaff and flare dispenser. We put our buckets there empty here, but for when we're being targeted by the enemy, we can deploy chaff or flares. Chaff to decoy radars and flares to decoy the IR missiles. Oh, wow. Yeah. But this actually creates, you can see inside here, the boat tail, and the plane is sitting low because of, unfortunately, the flat tire. Yeah. So it's usually not quite this low, but a lot of lift is actually created in this area here. So the plane is pretty efficient design. We'd be able to stay airborne for quite a while, loiter. Two large vertical tails with rudders, of course. Yeah. And the initial design back in the late 60s had a single tail, but for stability they needed to add augment put to it. Now, you'll notice that the engines are fairly far apart. That's like 12 feet. Yeah. That becomes an issue if one of these engines is not functioning properly, or at worst case it fails on you completely. You have a pretty terrific yaw moment where only one engine is putting out thrust. The plane's going to want to go opposite. That becomes really dangerous in a slow flight environment because obviously you're going slow, like landing on the aircraft carrier. You lose an engine, it's very difficult to land a plane single engine, and you always carry a lot of extra speed because of that asymmetric yaw that you would have from one of the engines not working right. So, wow. Yeah, it makes for exciting times on the aircraft carrier. And for the most part, again, I would say the vast majority of the time the wings are pretty much going to be forward, but as we speed up for an intercept, they will go back. They're computed by the air data computer that would move them back to the ideal location. It's a pretty interesting marvel because it's very reliable. You think that'd be one of the things that would not work as well? Yeah. It was very, very reliable piece of technology, and again, kind of makes it a very special part of the Tomcat. The other side here, this one does not have an external tank. You can see you wouldn't be able to fly it that way. You have both or none. So they'd only have one, I would guess. Again, this is where the lighter Sidewinder missile would go, and then the Sparrow or the Phoenix would go there. And that you can see that fin is for the tank.
Quick question on the configuration: could you deploy missiles with the wings swept and out, or does it matter?
Didn't matter.
Okay,
that's
pretty cool.
Yep. And in fact, I would say the wings more often than not, because we're speeding up. That's going to help our missiles as we're flying towards our enemies. So we might be up towards Mach or maybe even supersonic. So the wings would probably be fairly close to all the way back, if not all the way back, and have no issues launching. Cool. Again, it is operated by two, pilot, and in the back, in the fighter community, we call them radar intercept officers. Okay. In the attack community, they call them, well, in the A6, it was a bombardier navigator or BN. In the newer parlance, is more of an Air Force thing, WISO, weapons system operator. The Rios were in the Tomcat, radar intercept officer, and they would manage the AUG-9 in the F-14A or the APG-71 in the F-14D, and pretty much be able, at both you could launch missiles from either cockpit. So we usually did, the standard was typically the backseater would launch missiles beyond visual range. So let's say outside of 15 miles or so, the longer range timeline, they would launch the missile. Once you got within the ACM or air combat maneuverable arena where you see planes moving, which is inside of 10 miles or so, the pilot would almost exclusively do it because at this point we're primarily looking for heat signature for our IR or you know, even closer guns.
Yes.
The plane actually never got the latest missile, which was the AMRAAM. It was supposed to, the AIM-120, but because that really just duplicated the ability of the Phoenix, they prefer to put the money elsewhere, and that's when it got heavily into the air-to-ground war. And the plane was awesome at carrying heavy bombs, and it was very accurate with the, on this is where we'd carry the, on this right here we'd carry that pod, which is called the lantern pod, and that is like the eyeball for your FLIR.
Okay.
So consequently, whenever we laze a target, we pretty much always have to have it on the right side because we wouldn't want to laze, you can't laze through the airplane, you can't see through it. So that's how we would typically, we'd drop the bomb and then we would laze it if we're sticking around, of course. So we carried all kinds of, even got qualified to carry JDAM, which was a precision guided weapon that was based off GPS. The plane, again, it basically kept getting added on newer technology on a plane that was designed in the 60s, and it did great and until the day, you know, they retired it in 2006. And this was one of the last ones that flew, the squadron. And then again, all the Tomcat squadrons transitioned to this Super Hornet, which was, it's like the old Hornet, but bigger. It had a little bit bigger wing area, bigger engine, a little bit more capability because it had even newer technology. So.
I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your time at Top Gun. I see it on this.
Oh yeah, I went through Top Gun as, in fact, I went through an F-14D. It's one of the, you know, you typically have fighter guys go through Top Gun and then they go back to the squadron to sort of like spread the education, okay? And that's the way I went through Top Gun in 90, and was still at Miramar in San Diego. Now, in 96, they gave the Navy base Miramar to the Marine Corps. So Top Gun moved up to Fallon, Nevada. That's where I joined it as an instructor for Top Gun. And it was a lot of work. I mean, and at this point, the program had kind of been changed. It was a little bit more serious because they had found that a lot of Top Gun graduates, once they went back to their squadron, they would usually get out and fly for the airlines. It's a Cessna. So they made it so that if you became an instructor or if you went through the course, you'd have a little bit of an obligation, so that they kept that resident knowledge. And they actually stood up what mini weapon schools or mini Top Guns on each coast. So at this point now, we're not just training the guys that are going to go back to fleet, we're training teaching the teachers, right? We're teaching those who are going to go to these smaller weapon schools, and then from there, they'll train the fleet at those usually on the east coast at Virginia Beach or NAS Oceana, and it was in Lemoore, California, because again they closed Miramar. It didn't close, it became a Marine Corps base. So it was a little different. So it was exciting times, a lot of work, because I will tell you, in the Navy they rotate you between a sea tour where you're on the aircraft carrier going out to sea, and a shore tour, which is where you're an instructor. You're maybe still flying the Tomcat, but you're an instructor. Well, Top Gun is considered a shore tour, so you're also supposed to be allowed to rest and refit because you got to go back out to sea in a couple of years. Top Gun was not the most restful career. It was quite a bit of work, you know, and so long hours, but you became the best you're ever going to be, and you were a very valued commodity because everybody wanted a Top Gun instructor to be in their squadron. So it was a good ticket to have, you know, in your background, but it was a lot of work, and it was interesting to see that program sort of evolve over time from, I don't want to say it was a flying club, but in the 70s, 80s, you know, it started in 1969, and it did great things. I mean, it helped our skills, and it basically, in a nutshell, it figured out how is the best way to approach and do a certain task. In this case, it's flying combat maneuvers in a fighter. Who does it the best? How do they do it? And then we take that and make that the standard. And everybody needs to do it that way because people say, oh, there's so many ways you could skin a cat. Well, there's typically one best reliable way, and that's what Top Gun was about, was finding that way and making sure that is standardized and everybody adheres to that standard. And that's essentially what they did even more serious in the 96, 97 timeframe when they fleeted up this new weapons school program that I mentioned before, where now you're teaching the teachers. So those teachers become, again, very valuable commodities. They go back to the fleet and then they train your everyday pilots as they go through the weapons school.
And did you have a favorite F-14 model?
Yes, the F-14D was definitely my favorite. At one time I ended up with about equal amount of times in the F-14A, F-14B, and F-14D. And of course the D was the newest. It had newer technology, and the bigger engines, better radar. I mean, it was just better all the way around. Yeah. So that was definitely my favorite, and it was a lot more reliable. Now, a lot of that had to do with it was a new airplane. I actually got the pleasure of picking some of these up in Grumman, where they built it in Long Island. Got to go back because one was under warranty. We just received it and it had to have something replaced, so we got to fly it back to the plant, and we got to visit the plant and see the planes coming off, and it was really cool. But I love the F-14, and in particular I love the F-14D. It was a great piece of gear, and it's the best looking plane that probably ever exists.
I can agree. Everybody loves it
because it's so fast looking and sleek. Yeah.
We definitely thank you for the tour. Most importantly, we thank you for your service, sir.
I appreciate
Thank you so
that.
much. We really appreciate that.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, that's it, guys.